The first 24 hours. Like, subscribe and comment, because once you step inside the story, there is no turning back, and every second you stay might be the one that saves a nation or watches it fall. The sirens didn't scream. They whispered. At 2:17 a.m., in the rain-slick capital of a small European nation most maps barely bothered to label, every traffic light turned green at once. From the air, it looked like veins lighting up across a living body, glowing emerald and reckless. From the streets, it was chaos. Cars surged into intersections that should have been red, metal shrieked against metal, and the first emergency calls flooded the police lines like a broken dam. But this wasn't an accident. It was an announcement. Inside the National Cyber Defense Center, a concrete bunker buried beneath the old Parliament building, monitors flickered as engineers ran toward their stations, coffee spilling, voices colliding in panic. The city's infrastructure, traffic systems, rail signals, port cranes, even hospital generators, was responding to commands that no one in the room had issued. Someone else was driving. Director Alina Vorik stood frozen in front of the main screen, a former military analyst whose comm had been forged in war zones and border skirmishes. She watched as a map of the country lit up in cascading alerts, ports compromised, power grids fluctuating, currency exchange servers stuttering like a heart skipping beats. "Is this a cyber attack?" someone asked. Alina didn't answer immediately. She leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing at a detail no one else had noticed: the precision. This wasn't the blunt force of a typical digital assault. There was rhythm here. Timing. Restraint. Whoever was doing this wasn't trying to break the system. They were trying to play it. At 2:24 a.m., the first bank froze. Customers across the country watched their mobile apps spin endlessly, balances trapped in digital purgatory. Within minutes, rumors bloomed across social media. A glitch, a hack, a government cover-up. By 3 a.m., the national currency dropped 3% on international markets, a ripple small enough that only traders and economists noticed, but violent enough to matter. And that was exactly what the attackers wanted. Far away, in a place where sound itself seemed afraid to exist, a man sat in silence. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. A fortress of concrete and shadows built for the kind of men governments wish could be erased rather than contained. Inmates here were known by numbers, not names. They were blindfolded whenever moved, their hands cuffed behind their backs, guided by guards who never spoke more than a command and never showed their faces. Cell 312 housed a man officially known as Viktor Khedive. Officially, he was a disgraced economist convicted of market manipulation, accused of toppling regional currencies and ruining millions of lives. Unofficially, intelligence agencies across 3 continents called him something else. The architect. Khedive lay on his narrow bunk, eyes open, staring at a ceiling he had memorized crack by crack over the last 8 years. He hadn't moved when the guards passed. He hadn't asked for anything in weeks. To the cameras, to the routines, he was invisible. But somewhere beyond those walls, systems were shifting according to a design only he fully understood. Back in the capital, Alina Vorik ordered an immediate shutdown of all external network access. The country's digital borders slammed closed. Flights were grounded. Ports paused operations. For a brief, fragile moment, it seemed like the bleeding might stop. Then the markets opened in New York. A cascade of sell orders hit the nation's bonds like a tidal wave. Not chaotic. Not panicked. Perfectly timed, split across hundreds of accounts in dozens of countries, structured in a way that hid the hand guiding them. The currency plunged again, this time visibly. News tickers across Europe blinked red. A finance minister stood before cameras, face pale, voice tight, assuring citizens that everything was under control. He was lying. Or worse, he had no idea how badly the control had already been lost. In the cyber center, analysts traced signals bouncing through servers in Singapore, Sao Paulo, Reykjavik, Nairobi. Ghost routes. Yet every trail, no matter how twisted, curved back toward a single pattern. Someone was manipulating not just machines, but expectations. Markets, psychology, confidence. The invisible pillars that held a nation upright. This isn't theft, Alina said quietly, finally breaking her silence. This is execution. Her deputy, Tomas Riek, looked at her with disbelief. Execution of what? She turned to face him. The economy. And if it works, the country dies without a single soldier crossing a border. By dawn, supermarket shelves were still full, streets still busy, cafes still pouring coffee. Life, on the surface, continued. But underneath, the numbers were bleeding. At 9:42 a.m., the National Oil Terminal, one of the country's most valuable assets, reported a malfunction. Pumps shut down. Export ships sat idle, contracts frozen mid-signature. Energy traders whispered about instability. Prices shifted. Competitors circled like sharks catching scent. Every disruption was small, plausible, deniable. Together, they formed a pattern too elegant to be coincidence. In a secure conference room beneath the cyber center, Alina convened a crisis task force. Economists, intelligence officers, military strategists, all staring at projections that bent downward like a slow-motion collapse. A young analyst, barely out of training, cleared his throat. "There's something else," he said, hesitating. "We found a message embedded in one of the corrupted trading logs." The room stilled. On the screen appeared a single line of text, hidden deep within layers of transactional code, visible only to someone who knew exactly where to look. 96 hours. A countdown. The meaning hit the room like a physical blow. 96 hours. For days. Someone wasn't just attacking them. Someone had scheduled their destruction. Tomas whispered, "Who could plan something like this?" Alina didn't answer right away. Her mind had already leapt to a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, a file buried under red stamps and classified seals. A man whose strategies were studied in intelligence academies as cautionary tales. A man who believed nations were not defended by armies, but by numbers, and that numbers could be turned into weapons more precise than any missile. "Pull everything we have on Viktor Khedive," she said finally. "Every contact, every theory, every unfinished investigation. I want to know if this is his signature." Silence followed. Then movement. Urgent. By midday, whispers had reached the press. By afternoon, citizens were withdrawing cash, forming lines outside banks that hadn't yet closed their doors. The illusion of stability was cracking, and fear was seeping through the fractures. In Black Dolphin Prison, a guard paused outside cell 312 during routine rounds. He frowned at the small metal slot in the door. For the first time in weeks, Khedive was standing, not lying down. He was facing the wall, hands clasped behind his back, head slightly bowed. As if listening. That evening, as the sun bled out behind the city skyline, Alina received a classified call from an allied intelligence service. The voice on the line was low, strained. "We intercepted a transmission," the agent said. "It didn't come from Russia. But it references Black Dolphin. And Khedive." Alina closed her eyes slowly. What did it say? The pause. Then, "The sovereign theft has begun." She looked up at the glowing map of her country, lights flickering like a heartbeat struggling to stay steady, and realized with a cold certainty that this was no longer just about stopping an attack. It was about surviving a design meant to be unstoppable. And as the countdown continued to tick silently towards zero, one question loomed over everything. How does a man locked inside the most secure prison on Earth reach out and pull the strings of an entire nation? But when analysts decrypted the final layer of that intercepted message, what they found changed everything. Because hidden beneath the declaration was a list. Some of them belonged to people already sitting in Alina's own war room. The unraveling. The list arrived without ceremony. No alarms. No dramatic reveal. Just a quiet file, decrypted in the early hours of the second day, appearing on a secured terminal like a ghost slipping into a locked room. It contained 12 names. Some were foreign financiers. Some were shadowy consultants whose companies existed only on paper. And three of them, were members of Alina Vorik's own crisis task force. The air in the underground war room thickened as if oxygen itself had grown suspicious. For a long moment, no one spoke. Screens hummed. Servers whispered. Somewhere above, the city continued breathing, unaware that its lungs were slowly filling with water. Alina studied the names again, her face giving nothing away. Years in intelligence had taught her that the most dangerous traitor is rarely the loud one. It is the quiet, competent, indispensable figure who never draws attention, who becomes part of the furniture. One of the three was Tomas Ric, her deputy. Another was a financial analyst named Mircea Ionescu. The third was a logistics advisor assigned by the Ministry of Defense, Colonel Soren Halvik. She felt the weight of each name differently, like stones of unequal gravity pressing against her chest. This could be disinformation, Tomas said carefully, his voice steady. If I were orchestrating this, I'd want to fracture trust inside the response team. What better way than to accuse us of working for him? Alina didn't look at him. That's possible, she said. It's also exactly what a guilty man would say. Across the room, Mircea swallowed hard. Colonel Halvik didn't move at all. Before Alina could speak again, alarms flared across the main screen. The nation's largest shipping port, a concrete leviathan jutting into the cold sea, had gone dark. Cranes froze mid-air, containers suspended like forgotten prayers. GPS guidance systems began transmitting false coordinates, causing incoming vessels to veer dangerously off course. The world's supply chains were arteries, and someone had just pinched one shut. Within minutes, international news channels cut in. Footage of stranded cargo ships, reporters shouting over the wind, graphics screaming about mysterious disruptions and economic instability. Investors panicked. The currency dropped again. Another 5%. The bleed was accelerating. Alina snapped into motion. Shut down port automation entirely. Go manual. If they want to turn our machines against us, we take the machines away. A young engineer hesitated. If we do that, exports halt completely. Alina met his eyes. Better a heartbeat slowed than stopped. But even as orders flew, she knew they were always reacting, never leading. Khedive, or whoever truly stood behind the sovereign theft, was dictating tempo. They were dancing to music they couldn't hear. Across the border, in a quiet Swiss city wrapped in winter fog, a man named Laurent Weiss sat alone in a glass-walled office overlooking a river that moved with deceptive calm. Officially, Weiss was a private investment strategist, advising governments and corporations on risk exposure. Unofficially, he had once been Victor Khedive's closest collaborator. They called Weiss the Mirror. Where Khedive designed the architecture of collapse, Weiss refined it, smoothing the angles, hiding the seams. When Khedive was arrested years ago, dragged from a private jet in an operation that made headlines for weeks, Weiss vanished. No warrants. No sightings. Just a clean erasure, as if the man had never existed. Until now. Weiss stared at a screen showing live market data from the targeted nation. The numbers fell like silent rain. He allowed himself a thin smile, the kind that carried neither joy nor cruelty, only inevitability. They still think this is about money, he murmured to the empty room. They never learn. Back in Black Dolphin Prison, Victor Khedive received his breakfast through the narrow slot in the steel door. A tray, metal bowl, bread, water. He did not touch it immediately. Instead, he tapped once on the wall. Then twice. Then paused. The pattern meant nothing to the cameras. But to someone listening through the right channels, it was a pulse. Somewhere far beyond those walls, a system adjusted. By hour 36, the nation's power grid began to flicker. Not a blackout, nothing so obvious. Just rolling instabilities, brief outages that plunged neighborhoods into darkness for seconds, then minutes, then returned them to light with a cruel normalcy that felt worse than a total failure. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Data centers rerouted power. Every safety net caught, but each catch tore a little more fabric. In the task force room, tension had become a physical presence. Conversations died when Tomas entered. Mircea avoided eye contact. Colonel Halvik maintained an icy professionalism that revealed nothing and suggested everything. Alina had ordered silent background investigations on all three. Financial records, travel histories, encrypted communications. The deeper they dug, the more unsettling the patterns became. shell companies linked to Mircha, unexplained transfers connected to Halvik's offshore accounts. And Tomas was the most disturbing of all. His record was clean. Too clean. A perfect surface with nothing beneath it. Who do we trust? Tomas asked quietly one night, as the room thinned to a skeleton crew and the hum of machines filled the spaces between words. Alina looked at him for a long moment. At this point? The data. And even that lies sometimes. A new development struck before dawn of the third day. The nation's primary news agency was hacked. Not defaced. Not silenced. Instead, a single story replaced the front page. It was an investigative exposé accusing the government of hiding a massive debt crisis, of fabricating economic stability, of preparing to abandon the currency entirely. The article was written in perfect journalistic tone, complete with fabricated documents and forged expert quotes. It went viral in minutes. Panic erupted like fire fed by dry wind. People rushed to withdraw savings, to convert currency, to flee if they could. And every desperate action played directly into the attackers' hands. They weren't just collapsing systems. They were collapsing belief. In a secure archive beneath the cyber center, Alina finally opened the sealed Khedive file. Page after page detailed his career as an economic consultant for authoritarian regimes and fragile democracies alike. Everywhere he went, markets convulsed. Governments fell. Resources were quietly acquired by anonymous entities. Nations didn't always collapse, but they never emerged unchanged. One paragraph made her pause. Khedive believed that true power was not in destroying a nation, but in proving that it could be destroyed at will. A warning disguised as a theory. Alina's phone vibrated. An encrypted message, routed through channels so obscure they were barely legal to use. It contained only a location and a time, an abandoned rail terminal on the outskirts of the capital, in 2 hours. Against protocol and advice, Alina went alone. The terminal was a cathedral of rust and silence, moonlight spilling through broken glass like pale water. Footsteps echoed as she moved between decaying platforms. Her hand hovered near her sidearm, but she did not draw it. A figure emerged from the shadows. A woman in her 40s, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp with fatigue and resolve. "Do you know who I am?" the woman asked. Alina nodded slowly. "Mara Vance. Former intelligence. You disappeared after the Khedive arrest." Mara gave a dry laugh. "So did Weiss. And look how that turned out." Alina's pulse quickened. "You know where he is." "I know what he's doing," Mara replied. "And I know you're running out of time. This isn't just one operation. It's a demonstration. A proof of concept. They want to show that a nation can be looted without firing a single shot. And once they do, no economy is safe again." "Why tell me?" Alina asked. Mara's gaze hardened. "Because I helped build part of it. And because Khedive was never meant to be the brain behind this. He's the symbol. The myth. Weiss is the hand. And there's someone else you haven't seen yet." Before Alina could press further, distant sirens wailed. Mara stepped back into the shadows. "Trust no one on your list," she said softly. "Especially the ones who look clean." By the time Alina returned to the cyber center, everything had changed. Colonel Halvik was gone. His workstation empty. His access credentials used minutes earlier to authorize a data purge that erased critical logs tied to the port sabotage. A betrayal confirmed. And yet, as devastating as that was, it wasn't the worst news waiting for her. Because a new alert now pulsed at the center of every screen in the room. Unauthorized access detected in the central bank's gold reserve management system. They weren't just crashing the currency anymore. They were coming for the last physical proof that the nation still had value. As Alina stared at the alert, understanding finally settled like ice in her veins. This wasn't an attack meant to end in 4 days. It was meant to leave a country alive just long enough to realize it had already been hollowed out. And somewhere, in a prison designed to erase men from the world, Victor Khedive closed his eyes and smiled. Because the final phase was about to begin. The nation that almost vanished. Hour 72 arrived without drama. No explosions. No alarms screaming through the streets. Just a quiet shift in numbers that most people wouldn't notice until it was too late. The kind of change that only reveals itself when the damage is already done. In the underground command center, Alina Vorik stood alone before the main screen, watching the nation's gold reserves flicker in and out of secure registry access. Not stolen. Not yet. Just blurred. Obscured behind layers of digital fog, as if someone were erasing the borders around reality itself. Gold was the final anchor. The last tangible guarantee that the nation's wealth existed beyond screens and faith. If that vanished, the currency wouldn't just collapse, it would become meaningless overnight. Around her, the room was emptier than it had been days before. Some had been reassigned. Some removed. Some quietly detained. Tomas Riek was among them, sitting now in a sealed interrogation chamber, his once familiar voice reduced to echoes behind reinforced glass. He had sworn innocence, demanded proof, clung to the possibility that this was all a masterful deception designed to tear the task force apart. But innocence, Alina had learned, is rarely loud. Mircea Ionescu had broken first. Not in a dramatic confession, but in a tired, shaking admission whispered at 3 a.m. after 17 hours without sleep. He had been approached months earlier, offered protection, money, escape. All in exchange for subtle misdirections, for delayed warnings, for overlooked anomalies. He had told himself he was just smoothing bureaucratic edges, not participating in the dismantling of a nation. I didn't think it would go this far, he kept repeating. None of them ever did. Colonel Halvik, the most dangerous of the three, was still missing. His disappearance was not just a loss, it was a moving threat. A man trained in logistics and defense now unaccounted for, possibly guiding the final phase from within the country's own arteries. At hour 74, a private satellite network detected unusual activity at the National Bullion Vault, a heavily fortified facility buried beneath a mountain range and guarded like a relic of ancient power. Trucks with legitimate clearance codes approached the gates. Cameras showed uniformed personnel. Everything looked correct. Too correct. Alina leaned forward. Those codes were rotated last week. A technician shook his head. Not these. These are from the emergency fallback archive. They should only be used if the entire system collapses. Alina felt the shape of the trap before it closed. Someone wants us to believe the system has already failed. The gates opened. Inside the vault, sensors began to blink out one by one. Not destroyed. Overridden. A perfect silence settled across the facility's digital heartbeat, like a monitor flatlining without a sound. The trucks drove in. And then the feed cut. Within minutes, international markets reacted. The rumor alone that a nation's gold reserves might be compromised was enough to send shockwaves through currency exchanges worldwide. Traders abandoned positions. Insurance firms froze coverage. The economic floor cracked open. In a secure underground chamber thousands of kilometers away, Laurent Weiss watched the numbers fall with the calm focus of a surgeon. Around him, a small team of operatives worked in near silence, eyes fixed on glowing terminals, hands moving with mechanical precision. Status? Weiss asked softly. Vaults secured, one replied. Assets being transferred through layered custodial chains. By the time anyone traces them, they'll be distributed across 4 continents. Weiss nodded. And the nation? Functionally insolvent within 12 hours. A faint smile crossed Weiss's lips. Khedive would have appreciated the elegance. In Black Dolphin Prison, Victor Khedive stood in the center of his cell, hands resting lightly on the wall. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow. To any observer, he was a man meditating in captivity. But in truth, his mind was alive with maps and movements, the final notes of a symphony he had begun composing years ago. He had never expected to see freedom again. He had only wanted to prove that walls were irrelevant. Back in the capital, panic was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Banks closed their doors. ATMs went dark. Lines formed in the streets, faces tight with fear and confusion. People clutched documents, bags, children, as if any of it could shield them from a collapse they didn't understand. Alina stood at the center of it all, the weight of a nation pressing against her spine. Mara Vance's words echoed in her mind. There's someone else you haven't seen yet. Then a new transmission arrived, routed through an obsolete military frequency that hadn't been used since before Alina joined intelligence. It was a single file. No sender. No explanation. Inside it was a map of the bullion vault. And a name. Not Weiss. Not Khedive. A man called Adrian Cole. Alina froze. Cole had been declared dead 5 years earlier in a plane crash over the Atlantic. A brilliant systems architect, known for designing the digital frameworks that allowed international resource transfers to move invisibly across borders. His death had been widely reported, thoroughly documented. Or so everyone believed. If Cole was alive, then Weiss had not built this network alone. And if Cole was guiding the extraction layer, then the sovereign theft wasn't just about destruction. It was about rewriting ownership itself. Alina made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She authorized a total economic blackout. The nation would disconnect from the global financial system entirely. No trades. No transfers. No access in or out. A digital isolation so extreme it bordered on self-destruction. It would freeze not only the attackers, but the country's own economy in place, suspending collapse at the cost of paralyzing everything else. Advisors protested. Ministers shouted. International partners pleaded. Alina overrode them all. At hour 80, the switch was thrown. For the first time in modern history, a nation voluntarily vanished from the world's financial grid. Inside Weiss's control center, alarms erupted. We're losing access. Their systems are hardlocked. Weiss's expression shifted, just slightly. The first crack in his composure. How? They've isolated themselves completely. No external routes. No transactional pathways. It's like trying to steal from a vault that no longer exists. Weiss exhaled slowly. Bold. But unsustainable. They'll suffocate themselves before we do. But Alina was not trying to win. She was trying to survive. With the economic blackout in place, she mobilized what little remained under her control. Military units secured the bullion vault physically. The trucks were intercepted in a narrow mountain pass, their drivers surrendering without resistance. The gold had not yet left the country. For the first time in days, the nation gained ground. Yet victory felt fragile, like holding water in trembling hands. In a last, desperate gamble, Alina ordered a message broadcast through every channel she could reach, encrypted and open alike. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a revelation. She publicly named Weiss, exposed his shell companies, released classified documents linking him to past economic collapses in 3 other countries. And then she did something unexpected. She named Victor Khedive not as the mastermind, but as the prisoner. The world watched in stunned silence as the narrative shifted. The feared architect was revealed not as the puppeteer, but as the relic. The symbol Weiss had hidden behind. Markets reacted. Trust began, slowly, painfully, to return, not because the crisis was over, but because it was finally understood. In Black Dolphin Prison, a guard paused as news filtered through restricted channels. He glanced at cell 312. Khedive was sitting on his bunk again, expression unreadable. For the first time in years, the world knew his name. And that, perhaps, was the only victory Weiss would never forgive Alina for stealing. By hour 96, the sovereign theft was over. Not because the attackers were defeated, but because the nation refused to disappear quietly. Its economy was scarred. Its currency weakened. Its people shaken. But it still stood. Weiss vanished before international warrants could reach him. Adrian Cole disappeared back into whatever shadow had once swallowed him. And Khedive remained in Black Dolphin, still blindfolded when moved, still silent when watched. Official reports called it a coordinated cyber-financial assault. Analysts debated strategies, failures, lessons learned. Politicians promised reforms. But Alina Vorik knew the truth was far darker. This had not been a war. It had been a demonstration. A message written in falling numbers and quiet panic, proving that in a world built on invisible systems, the most devastating weapon is not a bomb, but a design. Months later, as the nation rebuilt slowly, painfully, a single envelope arrived at Alina's office. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside was a simple card. 3 words, typed neatly in black. Next time run. Alina closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle into her bones. Because she understood what those words truly meant. They hadn't failed. They had practiced. And somewhere, in a prison where faces were hidden and silence ruled, Viktor Khedive lay awake in the dark, listening to a world he had almost erased, and waiting for the day someone else would finish what he had helped begin. If you think the story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.